A gasp tore through the silence of the cramped attic room as Isabella Montclair jolted awake, heart thrumming like the wings of a trapped sparrow. Shadows twisted against the peeling wallpaper, and for a fleeting moment, she could not recall where she was, nor who she was meant to be. Then, the distant chimes of St. Paul's bell drifted through the city's mist, and she remembered Londres, her new refuge, her unsteady stage. She pressed trembling hands to her cheeks, drawing slow, measured breaths. Widow, she whispered to herself, tasting the word that now cloaked her like a shroud. Widow. Not Isabella Dubois, nor the other names she had worn in the past. Only Isabella Montclair, newly arrived from Kent, mourning a husband no one had ever seen. The scrape of footsteps on the stairs startled her. She smoothed her skirts, adjusted the black ribbon at her throat, and composed her features into the gentle, solemn mask she had practiced so many times. The door creaked open, and Mrs. Gibbons bustled in, bearing a tray of weak tea and toasted bread. "You're awake, dear. Slept well, I hope?" Isabella nodded, lowering her gaze. "As well as can be expected, madam. I am most grateful for your kindness." "Nonsense." Mrs. Gibbons' sharp eyes softened. "You pay your rent promptly and trouble no one. That's more than I can say for half my boarders." She peered at Isabella, her curiosity barely concealed. "You must find the city daunting, all alone." "I prefer solitude, truly," Isabella murmured, careful to keep her accent even and her answers brief. Just then, a light knock sounded and Marianne slipped in, cheeks flushed from the cold and her arms full of ribbons and lace. "Good morning, Isabella. I hope I'm not intruding Mrs. Gibbons. I promised not to keep her from her tea." "You are always welcome, Marianne," Isabella said, managing a faint smile. Of all the tenants, Marianne was the only one whose presence did not set her nerves on edge. There was a sweetness to her, a gentle perseverance that had nothing of guile. Marianne flopped onto the foot of the bed, spreading her treasures. "I have the most marvelous news. There's to be a grand ball at Ashbourne House. The invitations were delivered only this morning. Can you imagine? The Count himself is expected to attend." Mrs. Gibbons sniffed. "Those Ashbournes think themselves the center of the world." "Oh, but Isabella must come," Marianne pressed. "I told Lady Ashbourne's maid about you. She's given her word that you are to be included. Please, say you will." The room seemed to shrink. Isabella's hands twisted in her lap. "I'm not certain I would be welcome, Marianne. My circumstances—" "Nonsense! Widows are the most romantic guests, all those poets and gentlemen vying to console you. You mustn't hide away." Marianne's eyes shone with earnest mischief. Isabella's throat tightened. She could not explain that it was not the city that daunted her, nor the prospect of dancing in borrowed silk. It was the fear that in the flicker of candlelight someone might see through her veil of mourning, might recognize the girl she once was, that a careless word, a glance, could unravel everything. "I will consider it," she said at last, voice barely above a whisper. Marianne clapped her hands. "That is nearly a promise. Oh, we shall have such fun. I'll help you choose a gown. You have the loveliest figure for violet taffeta." Mrs. Gibbons, watching Isabella with a shrewd eye, intervened. "Don't overwhelm her, child. Give the poor lady a moment's peace." Marianne grinned, undeterred. "I'll come back this evening then. And Isabella, think on it. It might be just the thing to lift your spirits." When they had gone, Isabella sat perfectly still, listening to the faint sounds of the city below. She reached for her locket, pressing it to her lips. The memory of a letter, sealed in crimson wax and marked with a name she dared not utter, flickered at the edge of her mind. She could not stay hidden forever. The city was too small, its shadows too thin. Already, she sensed the past breathing down her neck, whispering her secrets to the fog. The invitation to Ashbourne House lay on the table, a crisp promise of both danger and possibility. As dusk fell, Isabella stared at the gilt-edged card, fear and hope warring within her. There was no telling who might appear at such a gathering, or what ghosts might follow her through those gilded doors. A soft knock sounded at her door, and Isabella's pulse quickened. She hesitated. then rose to answer, knowing that whatever awaited her on the other side, her carefully woven mask would soon be tested. Isabella's trembling fingers sifted through the ribbons and silks Marianne had brought, her mind as restless as the London rain that battered the window pane. Violet taffeta, Marianne had said, would do wonders for her complexion, but as Isabella traced the fabric's sheen, the color only reminded her of bruises, old, fading, and stubbornly persistent. "Try this one, Isabella," Marianne urged, lifting a length of soft lavender. "It's dignified, but not too somber. You mustn't look a ghost, even if you are in mourning." A tight smile flickered on Isabella's lips. "I hardly wish to be noticed at all, Marianne." "Oh, but you must let yourself live again." Marianne pressed a hand to Isabella's shoulder, earnestness shining in her eyes. "London is a city for new beginnings. No one cares about the past here, not unless you let them." Isabella said nothing. She watched Marianne's reflection in the cracked mirror, but her own gaze was drawn elsewhere into the shadowed corners of memory, where the past was not so easily left behind. She saw again the grey stone walls of the manor in Kent, the heavy tread of footsteps upon the stair, the clatter of a glass thrown against the hearth. She remembered the taste of fear in her mouth as her husband's voice slithered through the corridors, his rage as unpredictable as the winter storms. There had been laughter once, fleeting and sweet, but it was soon drowned by the bitterness of disappointment and the sharp edge of cruelty. A single night had changed everything. The moon had hung low and red over the fields as she fled, skirts muddied, heart racing, desperate to put distance between herself and the life that would have destroyed her. She remembered the frantic journey back roads and borrowed names, the ache in her wrist where he had gripped her too tightly, leaving a scar that even her gloves could not always hide. She pressed her palm to her throat, fighting the swell of panic. "I'm not sure I belong at such a gathering," she murmured. Marianne only smiled and reached for a silver comb. "Tonight, you are Isabella Montclair. Nothing more, nothing less, and you will be the loveliest widow in all of Ashbourne House." Ashbourne House stood ablaze with light, its tall windows spilling gold onto the night-shrouded lawn. Carriages rolled up the drive, their wheels splashing through puddles, as footmen hurried to shield guests from the drizzle. Inside, the air hummed with anticipation, a symphony of laughter, music, and the soft rustle of silk. Isabella entered on Marianne's arm. Her head bowed, her heart pounding so loudly, she feared it would betray her. Candles glittered from crystal chandeliers, illuminating faces both strange and familiar. She kept her eyes low, gliding through the throng, acutely aware of every glance. "Do not fret," Marianne whispered. "They are all far too busy admiring themselves." But Isabella could not shake the sense of being watched. Every laughter, every whispered word seemed to brush against her skin. She clung to her composure, moving with practiced grace as Marianne introduced her to a blur of names she would not remember. And then, as the orchestra struck up a waltz, he appeared. Edward Sinclair, the Count of Ashbourne, stood at the head of the marble staircase. His presence commanded the room, not merely for his title, but for the easy elegance with which he moved, the hint of restlessness in his posture, the keen intelligence in his grey eyes. His hair was darker than she'd expected, his jaw set in a way that suggested both strength and a certain weariness. He surveyed the ballroom with a gaze that missed nothing. For a moment, Isabella was certain his eyes lingered on her, just a heartbeat, barely enough to call attention. But she felt it all the same, a prickle at the nape of her neck. "Edward looks particularly grim tonight," Marianne whispered, following her gaze. "I hear he's returned from the continent only recently. Some family business, I suppose." Isabella tried to look away, but Edward's gaze found her again. This time, he did not look away. He approached with measured steps, pausing to greet a dowager here, an eager debutante there. When at last he stood before Isabella and Marianne, the air between them seemed to sharpen. "Miss Montclair, I presume." His voice was low, rich, and threaded with curiosity. Isabella curtsied, careful to keep her gloved hands folded. "Yes, my lord. Thank you for your hospitality." His eyes narrowed, not unkindly. "It is always a pleasure to welcome new faces to Ashbourne House." especially those who prefer to linger at the edges rather than the center of the room. Marianne laughed lightly. Isabella is quite shy, my lord. That is nothing to be ashamed of, Edward said, his attention fixed on Isabella's face. Sometimes it is the quiet ones who have the most to say. Isabella felt her cheeks warm. She searched his face for any sign of recognition, but saw only polite interest. Still, there was something in his gaze, a flicker of memory, perhaps, or simply the searching nature of a man accustomed to reading people. "Would you care for some refreshment?" he asked, extending his arm. She hesitated, but Marianne's encouraging nudge left her little choice. "Thank you, my lord." He led her through the crowd toward the refreshment table, his manner attentive but not overbearing. As they walked, their hands brushed a fleeting, accidental contact. Isabella flinched, but Edward, sensitive to the movement, glanced down. The edge of her glove had slipped, exposing the pale, jagged scar that ringed her wrist. He stopped, surprise flashing across his features. For an instant, his expression was unguarded confusion, recognition, concern. "Forgive me," he murmured, his voice suddenly gentle. "Did I hurt you?" Isabella snatched her hand away, heart stuttering. "No, my lord, it is nothing." But Edward did not look convinced. He searched her face, a crease forming between his brows. "I have the strangest feeling that we have met before," he said quietly. Panic surged. The room pressed in, the music too loud, the lights too bright. She could feel the past clawing at her, threatening to expose her. All the carefully constructed lies, the delicate balance of her new life, teetered on the edge of ruin. Excuse me," she stammered, stepping back. Her breath came fast, her vision blurring at the edges. "I am not well. Please, forgive me." Before he could reply, she turned and fled, pushing through the crowd with trembling hands. She heard Marianne's voice calling after her, the rising murmur of curious guests, but she did not stop. She found the nearest corridor and pressed herself into the shadows, struggling to steady her breath. In the hush of the empty hallway, Isabella pressed her scarred wrist to her chest, feeling its rapid pulse. Had Edward truly recognized her? Or was it only her own fear, twisting every glance into a threat? Behind her, the laughter and music of the ball continued, oblivious to the storm within her heart. Isabella slipped down the back stair, her mind racing, her secret heavier than ever. She did not see Edward, standing at the edge of the ballroom, still watching the place where she had vanished, his expression troubled, uncertain. Outside, the rain had stopped, but the London night pressed close, thick with secrets. Isabella hurried into the darkness, knowing that her past was no longer content to remain hidden, and that the Count of Ashbourne would not so easily let the matter rest. The morning after the ball, the city's grey light seeped through Isabella's window, catching on dust motes that swirled like tiny ghosts in the chill air. Sleep had been impossible. Each time she closed her eyes, the memory of Edward Sinclair's searching gaze returned, accompanied by the echo of his uncertain words. It was as if he had peered straight through her borrowed name and mourning silks, and glimpsed the truth beneath. Downstairs, Mrs. Gibbon's clatter in the kitchen and Marianne's cheerful humming could not dispel the tension that coiled tighter in Isabella's chest. She stared at her reflection, noting the dark circles under her eyes, the wary set of her mouth. Her secret pressed against her like a bruise. Elsewhere in the city, Edward Sinclair sat in his study at Ashbourne House, the embers in the grate casting long shadows over stacks of correspondence. He turned the events of the previous evening over and over in his mind. Isabella's nervous composure, the tremor in her voice, the way she had recoiled when he'd seen her scar. He had known many women in his years, some bold, some coy, but never one who had fled from him as if her life depended on it. He drew a sheet of paper toward him, his pen hovering. His instincts, honed on battlefields and in drawing rooms alike, told him there was more to the widow than met the eye. Discreetly, he penned a note to his old friend, Thomas Redgrave, whose connections in the city's underbelly were unrivaled. "Thomas, there was a guest at my mother's ball last evening, a Mrs. Isabella Monclair, lately of Kent. She is recently widowed and staying at Mrs. Gibbons's boarding house on Fleet Street. I would be grateful for any information you might discreetly gather regarding her family and circumstances. Exercise utmost delicacy. Yours, Edward." As he sealed the letter, Edward's expression softened. He had no wish to frighten her further, but something in her eyes haunted him, a plea for help, or perhaps a warning. Isabella's morning routine was interrupted by Marianne's gentle tap at the door. Isabella, are you up? I've brought a scone from the bakery, still warm. Isabella managed a small smile. You are too kind, Marianne. Marianne's brow furrowed as she set the plate down. You left the ball so suddenly. I was worried. I was overwhelmed by the crowd. I'm not used to such gatherings. Marianne sat beside her, concern softening her features. You know you can trust me, don't you? If there's anything you wish to speak of. Isabella shook her head, her voice gentle but firm. There is nothing. Only the past, and I have no wish to revisit it. Marianne squeezed her hand. You are safe here, Isabella. Whatever it is, it cannot harm you in London. Isabella did not answer. Her gaze drifted to the window, where a postman in a blue coat made his rounds, oblivious to the storms that raged behind closed doors. When she descended to the foyer later that morning, Mrs. Gibbons handed her an envelope. For you, Mrs. Montclair. No return address. Isabella's hands shook as she broke the seal. Inside was a slip of paper, the words scrawled in a hasty, unfamiliar hand. Your secrets are not so well hidden. London is not so large as you think. Do not become too comfortable or the truth will out. Her vision swam. She pressed the letter to her chest, fighting the urge to crumple it, to deny its existence. Panic clawed at her throat. Someone knew. Someone had found her. She climbed the stairs blindly, shutting herself in her room. Only when she was alone did she let the tears fall. She had known that the past might catch up to her, but she had not expected it so soon, nor so cruelly. A soft knock roused her. Isabella? Marianne's voice was muffled by the door. Is something wrong? She forced herself to sound composed. No, I'm only tired. Please, Marianne, I would prefer to be alone. A pause, then the sound of retreating footsteps. Isabella sat on the edge of her bed, the letter burning in her palm. She could trust no one, not even gentle, loyal Marianne. If her secret was out, any confidant could become a betrayer. Edward's search yielded little. Thomas reported that Mrs. Montclair's references from Kent were legitimate but vague. She had arrived in London with few belongings and no family. Her husband's death was described as sudden, but the details were sparse, and there were whispers of debts left behind. No one in the neighborhood knew her well. She kept to herself, save for a friendship with the seamstress, Marianne. Edward frowned over the letter. He had hoped for reassurance, but the gaps in Isabella's history only deepened his concern. His thoughts returned to her haunted eyes, the panic in her voice as she fled the ballroom. He needed to see her again, to reassure her, or perhaps to understand his own restless curiosity. The following afternoon, he set out for the park near Fleet Street. He walked slowly, alert for the swish of skirts or the flutter of a bonnet among the trees. He told himself he was simply taking the air, but his heart stuttered when he saw Isabella seated on a weathered bench, her hands folded tightly in her lap, her gaze fixed on the pale winter sky. He approached with care, the crunch of gravel announcing his presence. Mrs. Montclair, what a pleasant surprise. Isabella's shoulders tensed, but she turned with measured composure. Good afternoon, my lord. May I? He asked, indicating the bench. She hesitated, then nodded. He sat beside her, careful to leave a respectful distance. For a moment, neither spoke. The wind stirred the branches overhead, sending a flurry of brown leaves across the path. I hope you recovered from the ball, Edward ventured. It can be overwhelming, I know. She kept her eyes fixed on the pond. It was very kind of Lady Ashbourne to include me. I fear I am not suited to such gaiety. I find such occasions tedious myself, he admitted, a wry smile softening his features. I prefer quieter company, or at the very least, honest conversation. She glanced at him, something wary in her expression. Honesty is not always safe, my lord. He studied her, noting the faint tremor in her hands, the guarded set of her jaw. Perhaps not, but it is sometimes necessary. A silence stretched between them, charged with things unsaid. Isabella's mind raced. Did he suspect? Was he the author of the letter, testing her defenses? Edward spoke more gently. I hope you will forgive my curiosity, Mrs. Montclair. You seemed troubled the other night. I would not wish to intrude, but if there is anything I might do, there is nothing, my lord. Her words were quiet, but firm as iron. I have no wish to be a burden. I only wish to be left in peace. He inclined his head, respect mingling with disappointment. Of course, but if you should ever require a friend, she stood abruptly. Thank you, my lord. Good day. As she hurried away, Edward remained seated, watching her retreating form. He felt the sting of her dismissal, yet also a curious spark, a sense that beneath her fear there was strength, and perhaps a longing not so different from his own. Isabella walked swiftly, not daring to look back. Her heart hammered in her chest, caught between the threat of exposure and the dangerous pull of the man who sought too much. She did not know who her enemy was, nor whom she could trust. The city felt smaller, its shadows deeper. But as she slipped into the crowd, she could not shake the memory of Edward's voice, nor the fleeting warmth of his presence. Two lonely souls, each guarding their own secrets, drawn together despite every reason to remain apart. A carriage lantern flickered through the London mist, casting Isabella's silhouette long and wavering across the cobbles as she alighted outside the grand entrance of the Royal Philharmonic Hall. The city's finest were gathering for the annual Ashbourne Charity Gala, a beacon of virtue and social prowess. Yet to Isabella, the golden light spilling from the arched doors seemed as treacherous as a gallows lamp. She smoothed the folds of her modest blue gown, feeling the prickle of 100 imagined eyes. In the weeks since the ball, rumors had begun to swirl through drawing rooms and tea tables. The mysterious widow from Kent, hiding behind her veil of grief, the Count's peculiar attentions, the question of her true origins. Isabella heard the whispers, even when she walked alone. She saw them in the way shopkeepers paused, in the polite, empty smiles of the women at market, in the sharp glances exchanged behind gloved hands. Tonight, Edward had invited her as his guest officially, as a gesture of charity. But she knew better. The invitation had arrived on thick cream paper, the script warm but formal. Mrs. Montclair, it would be my honor if you would accompany me to the Royal Philharmonic's annual charity event this Thursday. I believe you may find the music and company agreeable. Yours sincerely, Edward Sinclair. She had stared at the words for a long time, heart pounding, torn between dread and the glimmer of something dangerously like hope. A footman helped her from the carriage. Mrs. Montclair, I presume, Lord Ashbourne awaits you inside. Isabella braced herself, drawing a deep breath that tasted of cold and fear. She entered the hall to a riot of candlelight and laughter, the air thick with perfume and expectation. The walls soared overhead, gilded cherubs peering down with knowing eyes. Edward met her at the threshold, his dark hair neatly combed, his expression quietly reassuring. You look lovely, he said, offering his arm. Thank you, my lord. I fear I am quite out of place. He smiled, a hint of sadness in his eyes. So am I. More often than you might think. They moved together through the crowd, Edward's presence a shield against the tide of scrutiny. Isabella caught snatches of conversation as they passed. That's her, the widow, you know. Sinclair's new charity case. Do you suppose she's after his fortune? Each word sliced at her composure, though Edward seemed immune. He led her to a quieter alcove, where the orchestra's overture drifted like silk across the marble floor. If it becomes too much, he murmured, we can slip away for air. Isabella managed a grateful smile. You are very kind. I confess, I did not expect such interest. It is the nature of this city to devour novelty, Edward said, his voice low, and to resent it if it does not conform. As they spoke, Isabella felt the air shift, the arrival of someone important, the hush of expectation. Edward's mother, the Dowager Countess of Ashbourne, swept into view, a stately woman in dove-grey silk, her bearing regal, her eyes cold as winter glass. She regarded Isabella with a measured glance that betrayed nothing but suspicion. My son, she said, her tone clipped, you have not introduced me to your companion. Edward's jaw tightened. Mother, may I present Mrs. Isabella Montclair? Mrs. Montclair, my mother, Lady Ashbourne. Isabella curtsied, feeling the weight of the Countess's scrutiny. An honor, Lady Ashbourne. The Countess's lips barely curved. I am sure it is. Her gaze flicked to Edward, then back. We are most grateful for those who support our causes. Charity, after all, is a virtue especially for those who have so little to lose. The implication hung between them, sharp as a knife. Isabella struggled for composure. I'm pleased to support the Philharmonic's work. Music has always been a comfort to me. Comfort is well and good, but one must not overstep one's station. The Countess's words were soft, but the threat was unmistakable. Edward intervened, his voice calm but steely. Mrs. Montclair is my guest, mother. I trust she will be treated with courtesy. Lady Ashbourne's smile was brittle. Of course, Edward. I would never suggest otherwise. With that, she drifted away, her retinue of admirers in tow. Isabella exhaled shakily. She does not approve. She approves of very little these days, Edward said. She believes it her duty to guard the family name, and her weapons are sharper than any sword. Do you regret inviting me? Isabella's voice was barely above a whisper. He turned to her, his gaze gentle but searching. Never. I only regret that society is so quick to judge what it does not understand. The music began in earnest, violins soaring beneath the crystal chandeliers. For a moment, Isabella let herself drift on the melody, closing her eyes, imagining another life, one without secrets, without fear. But the spell was broken by a new wave of whispers. Two young women passed, their words meant to be overheard. They say her husband died suddenly. Some scandal in Kent, I heard. Imagine the nerve coming here. The Count must be desperate for company. Isabella's hands tightened around her reticule. The pressure in the room was suffocating, as if the very air conspired to crush her. She longed to flee, but Edward's touch on her arm anchored her. Come, he said softly. There is a terrace just beyond. Will you walk with me? She nodded, grateful for escape. The cold night air was a balm after the heat of so many watching eyes. They stood together beneath a canopy of stars, the city lights shimmering below. Edward spoke quietly. You are not alone, you know. Whatever burdens you carry, you need not bear them unaided. Isabella hesitated. It is not so simple, my lord. Some things cannot be shared. He looked away, the lines of his face etched in sorrow. I understand more than you might think. She glanced at him, surprised by the rawness in his voice. My own past is not as unblemished as society believes, he said. I was engaged once. Her name was Margaret. She died suddenly and under circumstances that never ceased to haunt me. There are those who blame me for her loss. There are days when I blame myself. Isabella's heart twisted. She had heard whispers of the Count's tragedy, but never from his own lips. I'm sorry, she said softly. He shook his head. It is not sympathy I seek, only understanding. Grief has made me different. I see it in others, the way it shapes their lives, their choices. When I look at you, Mrs. Montclair, I do not see scandal. I see a woman who has survived something terrible and who deserves kindness, not condemnation. A silence fell, heavy with things unspoken. For the first time, Isabella felt the faintest easing of the knot in her chest. Thank you, she said, her voice trembling. I do not know if I deserve your trust. Perhaps trust is built, not given all at once, Edward replied. If you wish for friendship, or even just a place to be yourself, you will find it in me. She met his eyes, searching for deceit but finding only sincerity. The warmth of his presence, the gentleness of his words, these things threatened the barriers she had so carefully erected. Footsteps sounded behind them. Isabella tensed, but it was only Marianne, cheeks flushed from the dance. There you are! I was looking everywhere for you, Isabella. Marianne glanced between them, eyes sparkling with curiosity. We were only taking the air, Isabella said. Mrs. Montclair was growing weary of the festivities. Edward added smoothly. Marianne linked her arm with Isabella's. You mustn't let them drive you away. They are only jealous, you know. You have more courage than any of them. Isabella smiled, small but genuine. Your friendship means more to me than you can imagine. Marianne grinned. Then let us return. The music is about to begin again, and I refuse to let you miss the waltz. As they re-entered the hall, Isabella felt a new strength settle within her. The eyes and whispers were still there, sharp as ever. But she was not alone, not truly. Edward watched her from across the room, his expression one of encouragement and silent promise. Yet the night was far from over. The Dowager Countess observed Isabella with hawk-like vigilance. Her lips pursed in disapproval. The rumors among the guests grew louder, more insistent, as if the city itself conspired to draw forth every secret. Isabella danced once, then twice, each turn on the floor a careful performance. She caught glimpses of familiar faces, some sympathetic, most suspicious. Once a gentleman brushed too close, his voice a low threat. "Best to leave before you are made truly unwelcome, madam." The pressure mounted until Isabella felt nearly undone. Still, she endured, clinging to the memory of Edward's words, the gentleness in his eyes. When at last the evening drew to a close, Edward found her near the entrance. "You were magnificent tonight," he said quietly. "I am proud to have you as my guest." She managed a faint smile. "I was only trying to survive. That too is a kind of victory." He handed her into her carriage, lingering as if reluctant to let her go. "Will you allow me to call upon you?" Isabella hesitated, fear and hope warring within her. "Perhaps, if it would not create further scandal." He smiled, a rare warmth lighting his face. "Let them gossip. I have endured worse." As the carriage pulled away, Isabella pressed her forehead to the glass, watching the world blur into gold and shadow. She had survived another night, but the past clung to her still, a dark shape at the edge of every joy. In the flickering lamplight, she dared to imagine a future not wholly defined by fear. Yet she knew the storm was not yet spent. The secrets she carried were gathering, threatening to break free. And as the city slept, a figure in the darkness prepared to strike, determined that Isabella's truth would not remain hidden much longer. The morning air in the gardens of Ashbourne was heavy with the scent of roses and the hush of secrets. Sunlight filtered through the yew hedges, dappling the gravel paths in shifting gold. Isabella stood at the edge of the great lawn, hands clasped tightly before her, as though she could keep her fears locked within her fingers. She had not meant to wander so far, but the quiet here was a balm after nights of stifling ballrooms and the ever-present threat of scandal. Footsteps crunched behind her, slow and purposeful. She turned to find Edward approaching, his expression softened by the tranquility of the morning. "I hope I am not intruding," he said, pausing a respectful distance away. "Not at all, my lord." Her voice was low, almost a whisper, but she did not retreat. He gestured to a wrought-iron bench beneath a sprawling elm. "Will you join me?" They sat, silence stretching comfortably between them. The world beyond the hedges faded. Only the distant chirr of birds and the gentle breeze remained. Edward broke the quiet first. "I find I am always drawn to these gardens. When my mind will not rest, there is something about their order, the way nature is tamed, at least for a time." Isabella's lips curved faintly. "I was never much for gardens before. In Kent I avoided them. They seemed too exposed. But here, they feel different. Safer, perhaps." He studied her profile, the delicate shadow beneath her eyes, the tension in her jaw. "You do not seem at ease, even now." She hesitated, weighing trust against caution. "There are some wounds that do not heal easily, my lord. The world expects us to move on, to hide the marks, but they remain all the same." Edward nodded. "Grief is a peculiar companion. It changes us, sometimes in ways that others cannot understand." His voice roughened. "I have known its grip. Some nights, I'm not certain I have ever escaped it." Isabella glanced at him, drawn by the quiet sincerity in his tone. "You are fortunate, perhaps, that people remember you for your strength. Women are not allowed such luxury. We must be brave and silent, or we are judged wanting." He frowned, his gaze intent. "I do not see you as wanting, Mrs. Montclair. I see a woman who has survived, who still endures." Her heart fluttered, torn between longing and fear. "Endurance is not always a choice." "No," he agreed quietly, "but it is a kind of courage all the same." A hush fell once more, but it was not uncomfortable. Isabella felt a slow warmth begin to uncurl in her chest, a dangerous hope. She wanted to speak, truly speak, to share the truth of her pain, but the memory of the threatening letter, of all she might lose, pressed her lips closed. She rose, restless. "Perhaps we should return. Your mother—" "My mother will survive a few minutes without me," Edward said, rising as well. "If you wish to walk a little further, I will accompany you." They moved along the path, past beds of late-blooming dahlias. Edward's hand hovered near her arm, not touching, but offering support all the same. "Do you trust anyone, Isabella?" he asked softly. She stopped. The truth trembled on the tip of her tongue, but she only shook her head. "Trust is a luxury I have not been able to afford." Edward's face tightened. "I wish it were otherwise. You deserve peace." Before she could reply, the distant slam of carriage doors and raised voices drifted across the lawn. A footman hurried toward them, bowing low. "My lord, there is a visitor. Lord Ravenhurst has called." Isabella's breath seized. The name struck her like a blow, cold and paralyzing. She remembered his face-cruel lips, pale eyes, and the mocking drawl that haunted her dreams. Edward turned to her, concern sharpening his features. "Are you unwell?" She could not answer. Panic flooded her senses, her vision blurred at the edges. She staggered, clutching her wrist as pain real and remembered flared beneath her glove. Edward caught her as she swayed. "Isabella, steady now. Breathe." She gasped for air, fighting the rising tide of terror. "I cannot." "Look at me," Edward commanded gently, his hands warm and steady on her shoulders. "You are safe. No one will harm you here, I promise." She blinked, struggling to focus. His face was close, his eyes fierce with protectiveness, and something deeper, an ache that mirrored her own. "Let us sit," he urged, guiding her back to the bench. He knelt before her, pressing her gloved hand in his. The glove had slipped again, bearing the pale, jagged scar around her wrist. Edward's thumb brushed over it, his touch careful, reverent. "Who did this to you?" Tears stung her eyes, but she shook her head. "Please, do not ask." He exhaled, his own pain visible. "You do not have to tell me, but know this, whatever you fear, you are not alone in it." Isabella's shoulders shook. For a moment she let herself lean into his strength, drawing comfort from the steady beat of his heart. The urge to confide warred with the terror of exposure. She hovered on the brink, caught between two worlds. From the house, Lord Ravenhurst's laughter rang out, sharp and predatory. Isabella flinched, shrinking away from the sound. Edward's grip on her hand tightened. "You do not have to face him, not alone." She nodded, swallowing hard. "Thank you, Edward." He rose, his resolve clear. "I will handle Lord Ravenhurst. Rest here. I will not be far." As he strode toward the house, Isabella watched him go, her heart pounding with dread and gratitude. The past was no longer a distant threat. It had arrived, unbidden, at her very door. She drew her knees to her chest, pressing her scarred wrist against her heart. The garden, once a refuge, now felt perilous, every shadow alive with menace. Yet Edward's words lingered, a slender thread of hope. Inside, voices rose. Edward's calm, Ravenhurst's sneering reply. The battle lines were drawn, and Isabella knew the time for running had nearly passed. She wiped her tears, drew a shaky breath, and steeled herself for what was to come. For the first time, she was not wholly alone. And for the first time, she wondered if courage might yet win out over fear. The air in Ashbourne's upper salon was thick with the scent of old books and the subtle tension of secrets. Isabella sat at the window, her gaze fixed on the gardens beyond, though her mind was elsewhere, caught in the tightening snare of Lord Ravenhurst's sudden reappearance. The world outside seemed oblivious to her turmoil. Sparrows chirped in the hedges, sunlight flickered on the stone path, and yet, within these walls, dread pressed against her ribs like a physical weight. She could still hear Ravenhurst's voice from earlier that day, a low, poisonous drawl as he cornered her in the shadows of the morning room. "How clever you are, Isabella, to have found refuge in such gilded company. But the world is small, and London's memory is long. I wonder what Lord Ashbourne would say if he knew the truth about you, about Kent, about your dearly departed. She had tried to brush past him, but his hand caught her wrist, thumb pressing cruelly against the old scar. "What do you want from me?" she had whispered, struggling to keep her composure as panic threatened to overwhelm her. He smiled, a wolf's grin. "I want what I have always wanted. Favors, discretion, perhaps even a little gratitude. You will do as I say, or I will see that your new life crumbles before your very eyes." Now, hours later, the words echoed in her mind with every heartbeat. She was trapped. The walls of Ashbourne, no longer a sanctuary, but a gilded cage. Her only thought was escape. If not tonight, then soon. She would not be made a pawn again, not even for Edward's sake. As she sat there, Edward entered the room, his steps cautious, his eyes searching her face. He had sensed her distress since Lord Ravenhurst's arrival, and though she had given nothing away, his concern was growing sharper with each passing hour. "Isabella," he said gently, "you are pale. Has something happened?" She forced a smile, but it wavered. "It is nothing, my lord. Only a headache." He crossed to her side, his presence quietly commanding. "You are not one to complain of trifles. Please, if there is something troubling you, let me help." She looked away, unwilling to meet his gaze. She could not bear to see pity, or worse, disappointment cloud his eyes. "You are very kind, but I fear there are some burdens I must bear alone." He crouched beside her, the sunlight gilding the strands of his hair. "Is it Ravenhurst? He is a man I would not trust with an empty purse, much less a secret." At his words, Isabella's composure fractured. She pressed trembling fingers to her lips, fighting tears. "Please, Edward, do not ask me more." He reached for her hand, his touch warm and steady. "I will not press you, but know that whatever it is, you are not alone. I would face any danger for you." The room seemed to shrink around them, the unspoken longing between them suddenly tangible. His words sent a tremor through her, not of fear, but of hope, that fragile, forbidden thing she had tried so long to deny. She wanted to believe him. She wanted to trust, but Lord Ravenhurst's threat hung over her like a sword. Edward stood, visibly restraining himself. "If ever you wish to confide in me, Isabella, you need only ask. I will listen, and I will fight for you, if you let me." Before she could answer, he bowed his head and left, the door closing softly behind him. That evening, the house was suffused with uneasy quiet. Isabella paced her small chamber, her mind racing. Ravenhurst's demands were impossible. To give in would be to lose herself, yet refusal meant ruin. Edward's kindness haunted her, his promise of protection both a lifeline and a torment. Could she risk involving him? Could she risk trusting anyone? A soft knock broke her reverie. Marianne slipped in, her eyes wide with worry. "Isabella, you have scarcely touched your supper. Mrs. Gibbons says you are unwell. What is wrong?" Isabella hesitated, her instinct to hide, clashing with the desperate need for comfort. "It is nothing," she said, too quickly. Marianne shook her head, sitting beside her on the bed. "You need not pretend. I saw you with Lord Ravenhurst. I saw the way he spoke to you. So close, so cruel. He is not a friend, is he?" Isabella's defenses crumbled. She pressed a shaking hand to her heart. "He is a man from my past, a man who knows things I would do anything to forget. He threatens to expose me, Marianne, to destroy everything I have built." Marianne caught her hands in hers. "You must tell Edward. He would never let harm come to you, I'm certain of it." Isabella shook her head, tears slipping free. "If he knew the truth, he would be obliged to turn me away. The scandal would ruin him as surely as it would ruin me." Marianne's grip tightened. "Isabella, listen to me. Lord Ashbourne is not like the others. He has suffered loss. He understands pain and shame. He would stand by you if only you would let him." A sob rose in Isabella's throat. "I want to trust him, but I am so afraid. I have run for so long." Marianne's voice was fierce. "You cannot run forever. Let him in, Isabella. Tell him the truth before Ravenhurst does." The next day dawned dull and heavy, as if the sky itself mourned. Isabella kept to the edges of the house, avoiding Ravenhurst and the curious eyes of the staff. Each time she glimpsed Edward, her heart twisted with longing and dread. The distance between them had never felt wider. Late in the afternoon, she found herself in the library, seeking refuge among the silent rows of books. She had barely settled when the door creaked open and Edward entered, his expression troubled. "I thought I might find you here," he said quietly. She rose, unable to meet his gaze. "You are persistent, my lord." He smiled, a shadowed thing. "I have learned that persistence is sometimes all that stands between despair and hope." He hesitated, then stepped closer. "You are in danger, are you not? It is Ravenhurst he holds something over you." Isabella's breath caught. "How did you?" "I have seen the way you flinch from him, the terror in your eyes. And I know that look, Isabella. I have worn it myself. Please do not carry this alone." She trembled, the words fighting their way to the surface. "He threatens to reveal my past. My marriage was not what it seemed. I left Kent under a cloud. If he speaks, there will be scandal worse, perhaps. I could lose everything. And you, your reputation." Edward's eyes darkened with fury and tenderness. "Let them gossip. Let them sneer. I care nothing for their judgment. I care for you." He took her hands in his touch anchoring her to the moment. "Whatever your past, Isabella, it cannot change what I feel. I would rather face ruin with you than safety without you." Emotion surged, fierce and terrifying. She shook her head, voice raw. "You do not understand. If you stand by me, you will be dragged down as well. You deserve better than that." He cupped her cheek, thumb brushing away a tear. "Do not decide for me. Give me the truth, and let us face it together." Their faces were close now, the air between them charged with longing and fear. Isabella closed her eyes, leaning into his hand, drawing strength from his certainty. "I am afraid," she whispered. "Afraid of what will happen if I trust you. Afraid of what will happen if I do not." He pressed his forehead to hers, his voice rough. "We will face it all, together. Only promise me, you will not run." The moment threatened to break with desire. But both held back, each tethered by secrets, each desperate for hope. From the corridor, a footman's voice called, "Lord Ravenhurst requests your presence, Mrs. Montclair." Isabella stiffened. Edward's grip tightened protectively. "Go to him if you must," he said, his tone steely. "But remember, you are not alone now, and I will not let him harm you." She nodded, fear and hope warring in her chest. The next steps would demand all her courage. As she left the library, she felt Edward's gaze on her, a silent promise, and a challenge to the darkness that threatened them both. The fate of her heart, and perhaps her very future, hung in the balance. Rain tapped at the library windows of Ashbourne House, its steady rhythm mirroring the wild pulse of Isabella's heart. The hour was late, the house hushed by the threat of scandal. Yet she lingered in the lamplight, unable to run any longer. The moment had come. She would tell Edward everything. The truth pressed against her chest, urgent and suffocating. She needed him to know, before Lord Ravenhurst destroyed them both with his poisonous whispers. Edward found her there, standing amidst the shadows and rows of leather-bound volumes, her posture as brittle as glass. He closed the door softly behind him, his eyes never leaving her face. "Isabel," he said, voice low, "you sent for me." She nodded, unable to speak for a moment. The words felt as if they would choke her. "There is something I must confess. I can no longer ask you to stand by me without knowing the truth. All of it." He crossed to her side, his expression grave. "Whatever it is, you may tell me. Nothing you could say would make me turn away." She searched his eyes for any sign of doubt, any shadow of the judgment she so feared. But she found only tenderness there, and a fierce determination. Taking a trembling breath, she began. "My name truly is Isabella, but my life before London was not what I have allowed others to believe. I was not always a widow. In truth, I am not sure I ever was." Edward's brow furrowed, but he said nothing, waiting. "My marriage was arranged when I was very young, little more than a girl. My husband, Lord Montclair, was a man of means, but cruel, unpredictable. I was his property, nothing more. There were days when I thought I would not survive it. He isolated me, humiliated me, and when his rages were worst, her voice broke, and she pressed her hands to her chest, as if to hold herself together. When I tried to resist him, he left me this. She slipped off her glove and bared her wrist, revealing the pale, jagged scar. He caught me as I tried to escape. The wound nearly took my life, but I would not give him the satisfaction of my death. Edward reached for her hand, his touch gentle. She saw his jaw tighten with restrained fury, but his voice was a caress. You endured more than anyone should have to bear. She blinked away tears, her voice gaining strength. After that night, I realized I could not remain. There was no help to be found in Kent, no one who would believe a wife over her husband. So I made a desperate plan. I set a fire in the East Wing, and in the chaos, I fled. I left behind everything, my name, my belongings, even the little hope I had. In the days that followed, the news spread that I had perished in the flames. I let them believe it, for it was the only way to be free. Edward's eyes shone with unshed tears. Isabella! She shook her head, unable to bear his pity. I have lived in fear ever since. I came to London and called myself a widow, hoping to vanish among strangers. But Ravenhurst, he knew my husband, and now he knows I live. He threatens to reveal everything, to destroy the life I have built. Edward drew her close, his embrace steadying her trembling frame. You are not to blame. Nothing you suffered was your fault. I swear to you I will protect you, whatever the cost. She let herself rest against him for a moment, the storm of confession leaving her spent. You must understand, Edward. If you are seen to defend me, you will suffer for it. Your family, your reputation. He silenced her, with a gentle touch to her cheek. Let them talk. I have lost before and survived. I will not lose you to fear. She closed her eyes, letting the warmth of his promise seep into the coldest places of her soul. For the first time, she felt the faintest hope that she might not be alone. Yet even as they clung to each other in the shadowed library, the storm outside was mirrored within the city. Lord Ravenhurst moved quickly, his venomous words spreading through parlors and clubs with the speed of fire. Whispers became rumors. Rumors became accusation. The story grew with every telling. The widow was not a widow, but a fugitive, a liar, a woman whose very presence threatened the sanctity of society. At Ashbourne House, the air grew colder by the day. The Dowager Countess called Edward to her morning room, her voice sharp as shattered glass. You cannot be serious, Edward. The entire city is speaking of her. Your name is being dragged through the mud for the sake of a woman whose past you cannot even claim to know. He faced his mother with unflinching resolve. I know more than you think, and I know enough. I will not turn my back on her. She glared at him, her pride wounded. You risk everything, our fortune, our standing, your future. You would throw it away for what? For a woman who brings only disgrace. Edward's voice was quiet but unyielding. I would rather lose everything than betray my own heart. The Countess's eyes narrowed, her mouth twisting with frustration. Then you are a fool, Edward, and you will bring us all to ruin. The pressure did not relent. Friends who had once courted Isabella's company now crossed the street to avoid her. Marianne, steadfast and loyal, endured the scorn of her peers for standing by her side. Even the servants whispered, their glances sharpened by suspicion. Isabella bore it as best she could, drawing strength from Edward's unwavering support and Marianne's gentle presence. But the isolation grew heavier with each passing day, the threat of disgrace looming ever nearer. One afternoon, as the rain finally relented and the city glistened beneath a pale sun, Isabella sat with Edward in the gardens, their sanctuary now shadowed by uncertainty. She spoke softly, her voice trembling with the weight of everything they risked. Do you regret it, Edward? Standing with me? He shook his head, his hand finding hers. Never. I regret only the world's cruelty. She managed a wan smile. Sometimes I think I have traded one prison for another. He squeezed her hand, his gaze fierce. This is no prison. We will find a way through together. The sound of hurried footsteps interrupted them. Marianne appeared, breathless and anxious. You must come inside. The Dowager Countess is receiving visitors, important ones. I fear they come to demand your dismissal, Isabella. Isabella stood, her heart pounding. It has begun then. Edward's jaw tightened. Let them come. I will not yield. Isabella hesitated, fear and hope warring within her. She had trusted Edward with her past, but the future remained perilous. Their happiness balanced on a knife's edge. As they walked toward the house, the weight of the world pressed down, but Isabella held her head high. Edward at her side, ready to face the storm that was gathering in the drawing room and beyond. The morning after the storm broke, the air in Ashbourne House was brittle with expectation. Isabella awoke to the distant clang of carriage wheels and voices that carried a note of urgency, the whole world seemingly poised for confrontation. She rose and dressed with trembling hands, bracing herself for a day she knew would change everything. Downstairs, the drawing room was already thick with the perfume of lilies and the sharper scent of anxiety. Edward stood before the marble hearth, his posture resolute, eyes fixed on the assembled guests, his mother, the Dowager Countess, her lips pressed into a disapproving line. Several family friends, their faces pale with indignation, and Lord Ravenhurst, lounging in a chair with predatory satisfaction. Isabella entered, head high, her presence commanding the room's attention. Whispers rustled through the gathering like wind in autumn leaves. Edward's voice cut through the tension. You are all here because you wish to pass judgment. I will save you the trouble. I have made my decision and it will not change. Mrs. Montclair is under my protection. Any attack upon her is an attack upon me. The Dowager Countess's fan snapped shut. Edward, you must be mad. You would throw away your future, your family's good name, for a woman whose very presence brings scandal to our door. He did not waver. It is not Isabella who has brought shame to this house, but those who value reputation above justice and compassion. Lord Ravenhurst's lips curled into a sneer. You know nothing of what you defend, Ashbourne. The lady is not what she appears. She is a liar and a fugitive. Society will not forgive such deceit. Edward turned to him, eyes cold. I know more than enough, and I would rather be shunned by society than complicit in its cruelty. A shocked silence followed. Some guests averted their eyes, others stared at Isabella with open hostility. She felt the familiar sting of shame and fear, but Edward's hand found hers, steady and sure. He drew her forward, as if daring the world to challenge them. The news spread like wildfire. By midday, the scandal was the only topic in every parlor, every club, every market stall. Isabella found herself cut off from the polite world. Invitations vanished. Acquaintances crossed the street to avoid her, and servants whispered behind gloved hands. Even Marianne's shop saw its customers dwindle, but Marianne remained fiercely loyal, a bulwark against the storm. You must not let them see you falter, Marianne urged, grasping Isabella's hands. They want to see you broken, but you are stronger than all of them. Isabella managed a smile, her gratitude shining through exhaustion. I'm only as strong as those who stand beside me. Edward, for his part, became her shield and her champion. He faced his family's wrath with unflinching calm, enduring his mother's tears and his friends' reproaches with the same stubborn dignity. My decision is final, he told his mother one evening. I will not abandon Isabella. If the world turns its back on me, so be it. The Dowager Countess's voice trembled with fury and pain. You would cast us all into disgrace for her. Edward met her gaze, the pain in his eyes undisguised. If that is the price of honor, yes. But the true threat came not from society's disdain, but from Lord Ravenhurst himself. Frustrated by Edward's defiance, he grew bolder. Notes appeared beneath Isabella's door, filled with veiled threats and cruel reminders of her past. Once, she glimpsed him watching her from across the street, his gaze full of dark promise. Edward's worry deepened. He will not stop until he is exposed, he said. We must find proof of his crimes. It is the only way to silence him. But how? Isabella asked, her voice taut with fear. He is too clever, too careful. We will not face him alone, Edward replied. I have friends in the city men who owe me favors. We will watch, we will listen. He must have made enemies. Perhaps one of them will help us. And so began a tense and desperate campaign. Edward and Isabella, often accompanied by Marianne, visited the places Ravenhurst frequented. Exclusive clubs, gaming houses, even the shadowed corners of the East End. They spoke to servants, tradesmen, and former associates. Each night they returned exhausted and empty-handed, but their resolve only grew. One evening, in the flickering candlelight of the Ashbourne Library, Marianne burst in, face alight with excitement. I have found something. A footman at Ravenhurst's old house remembers a letter sent years ago, threatening a scandal if Ravenhurst did not pay. The footman kept a copy, hoping one day to use it. He will give it to us for a price. Edward clasped Marianne's hands in gratitude. You are remarkable. Isabella's hope flickered to life. If we can prove Ravenhurst has blackmailed others, then his word will be worthless, Edward finished, and you will be free. But freedom, even the promise of it, could not erase the loneliness of exile. Isabella's days became a blur of stares and whispers, her nights haunted by the fear that Edward would one day regret his sacrifice. Yet in their stolen moments on the terrace at dusk, in the quiet hush of the drawing room, their bond deepened. They spoke of everything and nothing, of childhood joys, of heartbreak, of the strange hope that had bound them in adversity. It was on such an evening, as rain swept the windows and a fire crackled in the grate, that the tension between them finally broke. Edward paced before the hearth, torn between frustration and longing. I cannot bear to see you suffer, he said, voice rough. If there were anything I could do, anything, I would do it without hesitation. Isabella rose, her eyes shining. You have done more for me than anyone ever has. You have given me hope, Edward. That is a gift I never dreamed I would receive. He stopped, facing her, the distance between them charged and perilous. Isabella, I have tried to be patient, to give you the space you need, but I can no longer pretend. I love you. I have loved you from the first moment I saw your courage, your kindness, your strength. If the future is uncertain, let it be uncertain together. Tears filled her eyes, but her voice was steady. Edward, I love you too. I have fought it, denied it, but I cannot any longer. Even if the world stands against us, I will not turn away. He crossed to her, gathering her into his arms. For a long moment, there were no words, only the solace of touch, the shared certainty that, whatever else was lost, they had found each other. A knock at the door shattered the peace. Marianne entered, holding an envelope. The footman has delivered the letter. We have what we need to bring Ravenhurst down. Edward's arms tightened around Isabella. This is only the beginning. Are you ready? She nodded, fear and hope mingling in her chest. With you, yes. For the first time, I am ready for whatever comes. Together, they turned to face the uncertain dawn, knowing the battle was far from over, but their hearts no longer alone in the fight. The first taste of spring lingered in the air, but Ashbourne House was gripped by a tension that no warmth could dispel. Isabella paced the morning room, fingers twisting a handkerchief as she waited for word from Edward and Marianne. For days, they had pursued every lead, tracked every whisper, piecing together the web Lord Ravenhurst had spun, and the evidence that would finally break it. Edward returned first, his coat dusted with rain and resolve burning in his eyes. Marianne has done it, he said. The footman's letter is genuine, and there are others too. Ravenhurst has threatened half the city for his own gain. Isabella's relief warred with disbelief. Will it be enough? Edward crossed to her, taking her hands. He will not escape this time. Tonight he will try to turn the world against you at the Ashbourne masquerade, but we will have the truth ready. You will not face him alone. That evening, the Ashbourne ballroom glittered with masks and finery. The city's elite gathered for what promised to be a memorable affair. Yet, beneath the gilded laughter, gossip simmered whispers of Isabella's supposed disgrace and the rumors Ravenhurst had seeded. The man himself prowled the room, a viper in velvet, his eyes never far from Isabella. Marianne slipped through the crowd, clutching a folio. The letters, Isabella. I have hidden them in the study as you asked. When the moment comes, we must act quickly. Isabella's heart thudded. Thank you, Marianne. I could not do this without you. Marianne squeezed her hand. You will not have to. The music stilled as the Dowager Countess, regal and unsmiling, called for attention. My lords and ladies, I thank you for your presence. Tonight we celebrate not only the arrival of spring, but the resilience of our family. Ravenhurst stepped forward, his tone oily with false concern. And yet, Lady Ashbourne, is it not also a night for truth? There are those among us whose presence demands explanation. All eyes turned to Isabella. She stood tall, chin lifted, refusing to shrink from the scrutiny. Ravenhurst's voice cut through the silence. Mrs. Montclair is not who she claims. She is a fraud, a fugitive who faked her own death, who deceived this family and all of London. I have proof. He brandished a forged letter, waving it above his head. Gasps and mutters rippled through the crowd. The Dowager Countess's face blanched with shock and outrage. Isabella felt her knees weaken, but Edward stepped to her side, unwavering. That is enough, Edward said, his voice ringing with authority. You speak of proof, Lord Ravenhurst? Then let us see it alongside the evidence of your own conduct. He signaled to Marianne, who darted to the study and returned with the folio. These, Edward declared, are letters in Ravenhurst's own hand. They detail his threats, his blackmail, his efforts to silence those who knew of his crimes. Read them, and judge for yourselves who the true deceiver is. A hush fell as a footman distributed copies of the letters. The assembled guests read in growing horror. Ravenhurst's mask slipped. His bravado faltered, his eyes darting for escape. Lady Ashbourne's voice was cold and clear. Is this true, Lord Ravenhurst? Have you nothing to say in your defense? Ravenhurst sneered, but his words were brittle. Lies, fabrications. Marianne stepped forward, her voice trembling but firm. I witnessed his threats. I saw him corner Isabella. He tried to silence me too, but I will not be cowed. Edward's hand found Isabella's, and she felt his strength flow into her. It is over, Ravenhurst, he said. You have tormented enough lives. You will leave this house and this city tonight. The crowd erupted in indignation and relief. Ravenhurst, cornered at last, spat a final curse and stormed from the room. No one moved to stop him. He was already a ghost in their midst. The Dowager Countess turned to Isabella, her gaze less icy than before. You have endured much, Mrs. Montclair. Though the past cannot be erased, perhaps it can be forgiven. There were no cheers, no instant restoration, but the tide had shifted. Some guests bowed, others simply nodded in wary respect. Isabella's reputation, though battered, was no longer wholly ruined. Edward and Marianne stood by her, their testimonies a shield against the lingering suspicion. As the ball resumed, Isabella slipped out onto the terrace, the night air cool on her skin. Edward joined her, his expression soft with pride and relief. You were magnificent, he murmured. She let herself lean into his embrace, exhaustion and hope mingling in her chest. I could not have done it without you, oh Marianne. We are together now, Edward said, his voice a promise. Whatever comes next, we will face it side by side. From within, the strains of a waltz floated on the breeze, and for the first time, Isabella allowed herself to imagine a future not bound by fear. Yet as the city settled into uneasy peace, new challenges waited beyond the gates of Ashbourne, and the story of Isabella and Edward was far from over. Sunlight streamed through the tall windows of Ashbourne House, gilding the drawing room in soft gold. It was a new spring, and with it a sense of quiet after the storm, a hush not of defeat, but of renewal. Isabella stood at the window, watching the gardens come alive, feeling the weight of the past slowly loosen its grip on her heart. She was changed, forged by suffering, but no longer defined by it. Yet the victory had not come without scars. Within the grand rooms of Ashbourne, the family remained divided. Some relatives, their pride bruised, spoke in clipped voices and avoided her gaze. Others, especially Edward's younger sister, Charlotte, offered shy smiles and tentative gestures of welcome. At the head of this uneasy household stood the Dowager Countess, her posture as regal as ever, but her eyes less cold than before. It was the Countess who summoned Isabella to her private sitting room one soft morning, the invitation both a summons and a test. Isabella entered with the steady step, refusing to let old fears shape her new life. The Countess sat by the hearth, hands folded over a letter. She looked up, her gaze measuring. "Mrs. Montclair Isabella, please sit with me." Isabella obeyed, her heart steady, her chin lifted. "You wish to speak with me, Lady Ashbourne?" The Countess regarded her in silence for a long moment. "You have caused a great deal of trouble for my family. You have also endured more than any woman should ever be asked to endure." She set the letter aside. "I have watched you, how you carry yourself, how you shield those you love, how you refuse to bow to malice. I was wrong to judge you by the standards of a world that has never protected its daughters." A tremor passed through Isabella, but she held the older woman's gaze. "I never wished to bring shame to your house, only to survive." The Countess's mouth softened. "You did more than survive. You fought for your place and for the truth. My son has chosen well." She leaned forward, voice quiet but unyielding. "If you are to be part of this family, you will have my support. I ask only that you continue to show the courage I have come to admire." Relief shimmered in Isabella's chest, warm and surprising. "Thank you, Lady Ashbourne. I will do all in my power to honor your faith." The Countess nodded, a rare smile flickering at her lips. "Then let us move forward." The days that followed were not without their challenges. In the drawing rooms of London, the echoes of scandal lingered. Some whispered, others stared. Invitations were slow to return. But Isabella held her head high, refusing to shrink from the curious or the cruel. She found allies among those who admired her resilience, women who had endured, men who valued integrity over gossip. Marianne's loyalty never wavered. They walked together in the parks, Marianne's laughter chasing away the last of Isabella's shadows. "You are the bravest woman I know," she said one afternoon, looping her arm through Isabella's. "You have given others hope more than you realize." Isabella smiled, the truth of it settling softly within her. "I could not have done any of this alone." Edward remained at her side, his devotion quiet but unwavering. He shielded her when needed, but more often, he simply offered his hand, his presence, his unwavering belief in her strength. Each day, their love deepened, no longer forbidden or fragile, but rooted in respect and hard-won trust. One evening, as dusk painted the sky in hues of rose and lavender, Edward found her in the garden, among the first blooms of the season. He reached for her hand, his touch gentle. "Isabella," he murmured, "I have watched you walk through fire, and never once have you faltered. I would ask you now, not out of duty or expectation, but from the truest part of my heart, will you marry me?" She looked up at him, her eyes bright with tears that were not of sorrow, but of joy. "Yes, Edward. Not because I must, but because I choose you. I choose our future, whatever it may bring." He drew her into his arms, the promise of their new beginnings sealed not with grand words, but with the quiet certainty of love. Their wedding was simple by society's standards, attended by only those who had stood by them. The Dowager Countess gave her blessing, and Charlotte wept openly with happiness. Marianne served as Isabella's witness, beaming with pride. There was no parade of nobility, no ostentatious celebration, only warmth, laughter, and the hush of genuine affection. After the ceremony, as twilight deepened, Edward led Isabella to the small study they now shared. The fire glowed low, casting gentle shadows. She slipped off her glove, bearing the scar on her wrist, the mark of her old life. Edward knelt before her, his gaze reverent. "You have nothing to hide from me, not now, not ever." She held out her hand, palm up. "This scar is not a mark of shame. It is proof that I survived, that I chose to live, even when the world told me to surrender." He pressed his lips to her wrist, a vow in the touch. "You are the bravest soul I have ever known. I am honored to share your life." She sank into his embrace, the last of her fears slipping away. In the safety of his arms, she was no longer the hunted, no longer a shadow. She was Isabella, wife, survivor, beloved. Outside, laughter drifted up from the gardens, where Marianne and Charlotte chased lanterns on the breeze. Inside, Isabella and Edward built their own world, marked by acceptance, courage, and a love that would not be denied. As the night deepened, Isabella gazed at the scar that had once bound her to the past. Now in Edward's arms, it became a symbol not of pain, but of hope, a testament to all she had overcome, and all she would embrace in the days to come.